Let me read to you a passage from the 12th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 13 to 21. It's the Gospel for Monday of the 29th week in Ordinary Time, Year 2. St. Luke writes, "Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' Jesus replied, 'Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?' Then he said to them, 'Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.' And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my crops. And I'll say to myself, you have many good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God.'" That's from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. And what does it suggest to us? Well, just watch a bee going from flower to flower, gathering its provisions. Or watch a bird flying past with food in its beak, making its way back to its nest. It is gathering what it needs to protect itself and its young. So too with mankind. We gather what we need from the world around us to make provision for our security and our requirements. We need to gain possession of things, or at least make provision for a secure use of them. The danger is that we can gradually think of little else and spend our lives gaining temporal goods, with the result that we are left poor in goods that are needed for eternity. I often refer to something I noticed years ago. When I was young, our family had a dog, and a relative of ours paid us a visit bringing her own dog. And we placed the two dogs together in the backyard. Our dog was jealous. With another dog now present, it was obviously no longer the top dog on the scene. It wanted to be, though. So what did it do? It went around the yard and dug up all the bones it had kept in different locations and placed them all together. They were large bones, and our dog knew exactly where they had been buried. With all those bones together, it then stood over those bones, watching the other dog, which was greatly frustrated. The other dog could only stand at some distance, helplessly barking at our dog standing over all the bones. Our dog was making its point to the other that it was the top dog because of all the bones it had. It had status before the other dog and security in the thought of the bones it possessed. How like that dog we can be in our attitude to material possessions. We can so easily think that our status, our worth, and our security lie in our temporal possessions. So many people set out in life with one of their principal goals being to gain all the wealth they can. At times they are successful, and at times not, but that is where they see their security to lie, in their possessions. The sad fact is that either during life or at the end of life, these material possessions will fail them. That is to say, ultimately, temporal possessions cannot provide security. Ultimately. In our gospel passage today that I read, a man in the crowd suddenly asks our Lord to adjudicate in his favour between him and his brother in a dispute over property, material possessions. Our Lord uses the occasion to warn against all forms of greed. Let us note that our Lord cautions against all forms of greed. We can be greedy for material wealth, but also for other kinds of wealth, such as the good opinion of many people, or power over others in one's family or or workplace, or whatever. Of course, temporal goods are needed if we are to do our work in life and to fulfill our responsibilities. That is to say, we need the goods of this world to fulfill our calling in this world to the love and service of God and others. But the danger is that our own self-interest can gradually lead us to desire these temporal goods for merely self-centered purposes. Then we become greedy, wanting more and more for our own personal enhancement. Our own life, is increasingly seen as consisting not in love and service, but in the abundance of our possessions. Our Lord makes this general observation, excuse me, that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And so he told the story of the man who had a tremendous crop, so big that he had to build new barns to store it. He thought he was secure and able to have a good time, with nothing more to worry about. That is what his life consisted in, the abundance of his possessions, and nothing more. The foundation of his security and happiness of his whole life consisted in possessions, rather than in the love of God and the service of others. God said to him that he was a fool. And that night his life suddenly ended and he was left with nothing. Rather, a man's life must consist in pleasing God and in thus gaining the wealth that consists not in temporal possessions, but in union with Him. What we must do then is to recognize the profound tendency we have of being attached to the things of this world and thus neglecting the things of God. Let us then strive to love God with all our heart and other things only in relation to Him, because He is our only true security and our only ultimate happiness. So what to do? Well, of course we must have, or at least use, material goods, but we must strive to be detached from them and wholly and completely attached to God. What will help us to keep free from the snare of greed is to work towards doing without what is entirely unnecessary and giving more and more to the poor. We must act against greed. We must take for granted that greed lies deep within us. We must try to observe it with a view to eradicating it, because it will undermine our love for God. God must become the love of our life, and other things must be seen within the framework of our love for Him.